This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net. It is time for your purpose, your power, your journey to authenticity. What I do on this podcast is I invite guests to come on and talk about their journey in life. And sometimes the journey, oh, we just lost everything. Oh, sorry about that. The internet just blew up, but it came back. All right. Just want to make sure everything is still working here. Okay, we seem to still be working. Those are called technical glitches. Anyways, as I was saying, one of the things that we do on this podcast is we invite a guest to come on and talk about their journey in life. And sometimes the journey that they are on or have been on isn't the prettiest, but what I find is that when people become resilient, when people find the answers to the questions that have maybe stopped them along the way. My guest today is Linda. I hope I pronounced the last name right. Is it Knipe?
Correct.
Oh, see, I never get anybody's name right. I'm starting off the week correctly. I met Linda Knipe through podmatch.com. And she has a story that, Linda, none of us want to be sexually assaulted in any way. And yet it seems to be something that happens once too often. Tell us your story and then we will discuss it.
Okay. Well, Karen, thank you for having me on and asking the questions. I grew up in a large, happy and loving family. I was the second oldest and the oldest daughter, so I took on a lot of responsibility to be helpful, and I was happy and felt loved and felt like the world was good and my life was good and everything was great. And then I left and went to college. When I was 18, I was quite far away from my family and on my own for the first time. But, I had a solid background and I was feeling very confident. And during college, I had an unfortunate dating situation. I had several unfortunate dating situations, but that's another story. But where I was on a date where I was sexually assaulted, and I shoved that away because I was so humiliated. I was young, I was shocked, and couldn't talk about it, and I didn't want to think about it. So I went on with my life, went far away for job opportunities. My family is in New York, and I moved to Florida and worked several jobs, lived with my college roommate down there. And then I started working for a magazine in Florida, and my college roommate went back to New York, and I was down there by myself. I had a little apartment by myself. And at that time, it wasn't soon after that my apartment was broken into, and I was raped by a stranger. And that was, again, shocking and terrifying. And but I had this great job, and I did have friends down there. And so before too long, I put that away and went on with my life and continued with my professional career. And I met the man that I then married and had children with. And we moved through another 18 years of life when I decided to go to graduate school and get my counseling degree. I was already working in the schools at that time doing what's called career mentoring. And in the very first counseling class that I was in, we were talking, it was a very small group because it was summertime, summer class. and we were in a circle talking about therapy, and the topic of therapy for rape came up. And I felt like somebody had just hit me in the face with something. And I left that class that night and started immediately to have re-experiencing symptoms. And over the course of the next few weeks, I had full-blown PTSD, and I felt crazy. I wasn't able to eat. I wasn't able to sleep. And I finally went back and talked to my professor, because being new to a counseling class, I wasn't even really familiar with PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, and it is a response to traumatic stress. And my professor explained to me that you can't just power through it or put those thoughts and feelings away anymore, as I had always done, which is what I was trying to do. And that was part of what was driving me crazy, is I'd always been in control of my mind. And he said, you're not going to be able to do that this time. You're going to need help. So that put me on the road to finding a therapist and starting on the therapy journey, and eventually writing about everything that I learned on that journey.
You know, it's interesting because many of us don't really understand PTSD. And when we learn that somebody is experiencing it, um, there's often that comment, well, can't you just forget it? Or can't you just move on? Um, and you can't. Okay. It is going to come back. Our body and our brain holds on to things that have happened to us. And we may forget them for a while, or we may pack them away for a while, but just about anything can bring them back unless we know how to deal with them and keep them at bay and understand. In your case, this happened twice to you. And I understand that it was in some ways much easier just to hide it, not to tell anybody, because as women, we often feel shame. We think that we exposed ourselves to the situation. Even when we logically know that's not true, we still, for some reason, come up with, must be my fault. Maybe it was the way I dressed. Maybe it's what I said. Maybe it was just the way I looked at that person. When your professor, after all these years, offered you some sort of an answer, this is possibly what the situation was, and now you needed help. How did that fall for you? Because sometimes we just want to say, no, you're wrong, and keep going.
Well, I was in a counselor program, so I knew that even though I had had a bad experience with a counselor, with a social worker, soon after it happened, she wasn't good for what I needed. And it left me with a real bitter taste in my mouth, but it was pretty obvious that I was going to need to find someone. But there is a lot of back and forth. Like, I was so humiliated by the dating experience that I told myself almost immediately when it happened that I was never going to talk about it. I was never going to think about it. And I had that buried really well. Um, and I was afraid that if I talked to a therapist, that he would somehow wheedle that out of me. So I was afraid about that because I was so humiliated. I just swore I was ashamed. It was shame that I would never talk about it. Um, and then my marriage was struggling, and I was afraid that if I talked about that, that it would end, that it would have to end. That was what I was thinking at the time. And so I was afraid that he would somehow get me talking about that. So there were a lot of things I was afraid of going into therapy, and it was all about I was afraid to talk. So I was not a good client. It took me a very long time, and there would be a lot of sessions that there was very little talking going on because my therapist told me, he was a psychologist, and he said right to start, he said, you need to be in control. I am not going to direct anything. Whatever we talk about is what you decide to talk about. And that was very scary to me. I didn't want anybody knowing what I was thinking about. So I stayed quiet a lot.
And some of us think that when you go to therapy, things get taken care of right away. You sit there, you talk to somebody, and they direct you, and you go, okay, I'm all better. The reality of it is, I don't care if it's coaching, therapy, any kind of therapeutic, modality. Number one, you have to be the willing participant. And you have to want to make whatever that change is. And until you make that decision, you will be stuck. So tell me, when did you sort of decide that now I think I'm getting the help I need, now I want to help others?
Well, I'm going to, if it's okay, Karen, I'd like to go back and talk about all of that stuckness and wanting the therapist to fix you, because that's absolutely what I wanted.
Sure.
I said to him, I just want you to fix me. I want you to ask me questions, and I want you to fix me. But the nature of our memory and what happens with PTSD is that the way memory is supposed to work is that there's an explanation that I really like that says that memory is biology. Well, biology plus biography equals memory. So the biology is how you experience things, the sensations that your body feels, which are the feelings and the emotions and the actual physical sensations when an experience happens. And the biography are the words that you put to it, the story that you put to the feelings in your body.
Okay.
So you have an experience, you have sensations, and then you think about it, you put a story to that, a narrative, and then you put it together, you process it, and it goes into a part of your brain, the hippocampus, which stores that memory. And you should be filed correctly, like in a filing cabinet, under the correct area, and you can retrieve it when you want. And some files just get way to the back, and you don't ever retrieve them. But the things that are important, you can retrieve. With PTSD, what happens is there's a section of the brain that is like the emotional high alert section. It's called the amygdala. And that is always staying vigilant. And it kind of regulates the body. It puts out the feelings that you have and regulates the body. So there are certain feelings that are pretty common with anxiety and stresses and things like you may start to hyperventilate, your heart may start to race, your eyes dilate, you're on high alert. And that high alert is meant to protect us. But when you don't process those feelings and sensations and body reactions that you had during the trauma, they kind of stay there. And your amygdala is always on high alert, and it's interpreting everything as a dangerous situation, and you're hyperventilating to oxygenate your muscles, to make you strong, to be able to either flee or fight. Your eyes are dilating, your pupils are dilating so that you can see better, to protect yourself. It's all to protect ourselves.
Sure.
But all of these other kind of things that may have been going on at the time, it may have been dark, you may have had a smell of cut grass. Those kind of things get attached to those emotions, those reactions that don't have anything to do with them. But then when those things happen, like the light might be a perfect way, it triggers that sensation, has nothing to do with it other than it got attached to it when it first happened, and that's how you've stored it. It's like the emotions get shoved in a file cabinet, just pushing papers away, not filing them properly. And they just, when you're going to look for something, that stuff comes flying out. That's what the emotions felt like. I would be in, so it happened at night. And when I was in a night situation where there were a lot of people around and I was feeling very unsafe, I would all of a sudden have these very physical sensations, like things were creeping up from behind me, and I could not stop those sensations. So that's what happens. Um, and that's why a therapist can't just ask you questions and you answer the questions and it enlightens you and then you're better and you go on. You have to really start pulling out the feelings that you had and what they were actually attached to, and you have to talk about them and think about them, put the narrative to them, and so they get stored properly. So it is a process that it is totally you, and the therapist is helping you, but it's totally you, and you've got to stick it out.
Yep, absolutely.
So
So,
I'm sorry, you asked another question, and I
yeah. So, and I know this is not a great question, but I'm going to ask it anyways, because I'm sure our listeners are wondering about how long did it take before you stopped sitting there not wanting to talk and then start talking and be able to start piecing things together?
the piecing together happened all the time.
Okay.
So um, the interesting thing about therapy and the strange thing for me is that even though I was overcome with overwhelming anxiety almost all the time during my everyday life, it didn't necessarily have to do with the fact that I had been raped 18 years before.
Okay.
It was life, and it was also, why are you feeling this way? Why are you thinking about these things? And yes, that happened, and you'd think about some of that, but everything else would get mixed into it. Besides, you're just thinking about life the way we all do. You're ruminating. You're ruminating on why things are like this, and why am I like this, and why is this bothering me? And so when I would go into therapy, it wouldn't be, I wouldn't want to go in and sit down and start talking about being raped. That wasn't what was on my mind. For me, I didn't want to talk about what was on my mind because I didn't want anybody judging what was on my mind because I was afraid of being judged. So I would not talk. And if I wasn't talking, nobody was talking because my therapist wasn't going to control the session. I'm talking right now about the way not to do therapy.
Okay.
So what I found did help is if I wrote things down ahead of time, like I would just make a checklist of things that I could talk about. And I have to take that with me because I wouldn't remember anything when I got in there. I was very anxious when I was sitting there. Um, when we would start talking about it, then my therapist would start helping me make connections to the way I was dealing with things and connecting things and what was possibly making me anxious. Through then he would have something to question me about if I came up with a topic.
Sure.
And then we would get to things that were aha moments, and that happened all the time. But I had 20 years of hiding trauma and letting it insidiously get into every part of the way that I functioned. So there was a lot. There were a lot of aha moments. There were a lot of, it wasn't until 2 or 3 months into therapy at least that I finally realized how threatened I had felt during uh, during the assault. Um, I felt like I was probably going to die in the next few minutes, and I never realized that until through a discussion, and we were talking, and all of a sudden I was back there describing how it felt to be contemplating my death, and it was a shock to me because I didn't realize that that was part of it. And so that didn't make me better. That actually threw me into a severe depression that then we had to start dealing with, because there was so much over the years and so much about the way I had been functioning and um, trying to manage my life that needed to be untangled. And for somebody that was unwilling to talk, it took a lot longer than it would have if I'd come in and sat down and said, let's get to work. This is what I'm thinking.
Sure.
But it did help when I would go in with a list. The other thing that would help is if I absolutely couldn't talk and I said to him, I really need help, then he would start helping me talk. But he needed my permission to do that.
Sure. When you were growing up, did you grow up in a home where um, you were taught to be silent? Because it's interesting, I didn't realize um, that I was until I became an adult. Um, and I realized that I had been told over and over again, you don't hang out your dirty laundry for other people to see. Um,
Yes.
okay. Um, because when I was molested, I all of a sudden just came out. And when I walked out of where it happened, I was with my mother in law. I told her right away. And um, I sort of made it public, and I went to the rape hotline. Everything that I'd been told when I was growing up, I like threw it away. It's like, I'm not going to be silent. And because I became so vocal about it and ended up having to take this person to court, um, it changed my whole personality. Um,
In what way?
changed my personality in that I don't hold anything back anymore. If I see something that I don't like or something happens to me, um, I'm verbal about it. Um, I write constantly. I do public speaking because being silent for me, um, I felt I felt damaged when it happened to me, and I didn't want to be damaged anymore. That was the catalyst for me.
So, what was the aha moment not about just speaking out for you?
Um, my aha moment was this was not my fault.
Ah,
And it was my mother in law who said that to me when I came out and said something to her. She said, "That's not your fault. You didn't do anything." And I looked at her and I said, "You're right. I didn't." But while it was happening, that's what was going through my mind. What did I do? What did I say? Why am I in this situation? And as soon as she said that to me, it was like, aha, I don't have to be silent anymore. But
yeah.
that most of us aren't that way. Most of us tend to hold it in because it is embarrassing. We feel like we lost a part of ourselves.
Well, I think when I had the break-in, I reported that right away. We went to court. He was convicted. Um, with, however, it was maybe 5 years after that date in college, and I put myself in a very vulnerable, stupid position, um, and what happened, um, what happened, I was humiliated about because I was, I was part of the twosome that was in a compromising position. The the thing is I had been clear that I did not want to have intercourse.
Right.
And beyond that, there was lots of play. And so when I came out of it, it was like, you put yourself in that position. You're not going to tell anybody because that's humiliating. And the other thing is I did not consider it rape, what
Okay.
happened, because I had put myself in that situation.
Sure.
And I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to create a visualization for anybody because, shame about our bodies is, according to Brene Brown, who researches this stuff, the biggest shame trigger that women have. And it absolutely came into play when I was in therapy because I did not want to create visualizations about my body. I didn't want to talk about things that somebody could think about my body being in. That was too shameful to me. However, I didn't get better until I talked about the date rape. And I didn't even identify it as rape until I was well into therapy, and it was the aha. And then it was my therapist that said to me what you just said, that your mother-in-law said, and that was about the date rape. It was like, this was not, well, actually, my therapist said, how old were you? And I said, 19. And he said, so you were a kid. And I had never looked at it as being a kid. We don't feel like children, and we don't feel old.
Right.
We just feel like we are. But I was inexperienced, and that's what he said. And he said, you've been blaming yourself all these years for, being the more savvy person that you are now. He said, you were a kid without experience, which was true. And it changed the entire way that I looked at it.
I'm sure you're not the only one who's been through something like that.
Well,
Because
and
go
yeah,
ahead.
and I'll tell you that as a counselor, um, I argued with myself about putting that particular experience in the book, even though it was transformational in my therapy.
Mhm.
That's when I really got better, is when I finally talked about that. Um, but what I know from having worked with so many young people in counseling is that this happens all of the time. And young women are, they're coerced, or they actually coerce themselves into thinking, somebody loves them, this is what they need to do, or they're going to change the guy or whatever. The other thing is that our young people are not taught to talk about anything. I used to say to kids, if you're going to actually have sex with someone, you need to talk about what's okay and what's not. And they're like, oh, I couldn't talk about it. It's like, well, you can do it. You need to talk about it, but they don't. And we're not good about training them. And we're not good about training our young men either. So I felt it was really important to put that story in the book, because what I said is situations that happen that can be traumatic for us may not be prosecutable. But if you feel like it was rape and it affected you that way, and you need to deal with it.
Yeah. So you mentioned, and I don't think we've ever at any age been taught how to talk about sex with a potential partner. Um, and I'm going to be honest with you, I was married for 42 years. My husband just passed about 4 months ago.
Oh, I'm
And
so sorry.
thank you. And we never really discussed what we were doing, what we wanted. There were assumptions made because that's the way the two of us grew up. And I do agree with you that if we could learn how to have these discussions, it might save a lot of us from humiliation. How do you help your clients?
Well, I was a high school counselor, but we were in a rural area, and the kids, for the most part, if they didn't have transportation to get out of town, there was no other counseling in town. So it was the school psychologist and the school counselor. And I was thinking, I took a course, and I'm looking in my book because it was actually training for serving alcohol, and it gets to this part about sexual assault, and it is what they said, and they gave a whole list of things that you should be talking about, and that you need to give consent verbally for everything, for every different kind of action. Is this okay? If it's not okay, you need to be able to say it. And it needs to be every time. It's not a blanket consent for all of your life to the same person. So that idea that you can't talk about things, I've read accounts of women who, especially after the Me Too movement, started writing about being raped, but it was in sexual situations that they just allowed everything to go on, even though they didn't want it to happen, but they felt like they were raped. And if you can think of both sides of it, and the whole Me Too movement was very uncomfortable because at the same time I was thinking, yeah, women do feel overpowered or coerced or whatever, but men are clueless a lot of times. I remember when some dignitary gave a woman a hug or a kiss on the forehead, and my husband, who was older at the time, said to me, "Oh my gosh, I've done that. Is that not okay?" And I said, "No, not in a work situation." It's like, and I explained to him how it feels from the woman's perspective, and he goes, "Oh my God, they really there's a world of education that needs to be done, and we need to stop being so Puritan about the way we talk about things in this day and age."
Right.
Because
Exactly.
everybody's getting their information from movies and TV shows and stuff that's not typical.
You know, it's interesting. About a year ago, I was at an event that my son was working at, and one of his coworkers came up to me to greet me, and I had never met them before. Came up and threw his arms around me and kissed me on the cheek, and I pulled away. Um, First of all, I didn't even know he was a coworker, didn't even know who he was, and my son saw it, and he saw that I was very, very upset by it. And the two of us took the time to talk to this young boy and explain to him how inappropriate it was. Now, he thought he was being friendly. And
Right.
his comment was, "Oh, I work for your son. And oh, I was so excited to finally meet you." And hearing his side, it was like, he was innocent in what he was doing. But when he heard why it affected me the way it did, I mean, the look on his face was so sad. It was like, that's not what I meant. But we don't explain to people. We tell people to be friendly, but we don't tell them where friendly begins and ends.
Well, and hugging is the new handshake.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So everything is confusing. We're giving mixed messages all the time, and kids are learning about sexual language and the way to talk about sex and the way to approach it that is not respectful or thoughtful about what the other person is experiencing. And
Right.
if we're not brave enough to actually talk about it and talk about it with our young people, then the only place they're going to get their education is either online or on media.
Yeah.
Or from each other, God help us.
Yes. Yes. Well, that's where I learned it from. So that's sad. That tells you why my husband and I didn't have a lot of conversations.
Well, and it's embarrassing until you get over. So there's one of the things that, and I heard it and I love it, and it's so true, is that you don't get comfortable. It's not comfortable, or you don't gain confidence by doing things that are comfortable. You gain confidence by doing things that are uncomfortable. You
Okay.
gain confidence in the bedroom by doing the uncomfortable part about talking.
That makes sense. Maybe I can rewind the clock and do that.
I'm reading a book by, oh my God, Abram. He wrote Tuesdays with Maury. And it's a book called Twice, and it's this guy that can jump back in time when things aren't going quite right. Anyway, I think that one of the things that we can do better is to start learning how to speak about relationships and sexual activity in a respectful way.
Sure. Absolutely.
For all of us.
Right. So
because that was one of the things that we were taught. There are things you don't talk about, and sex and religion are two of them.
Yep.
And politics, which, yes, we should absolutely include politics.
Yes. So how do my listeners find your book and contact you if they're interested in more information?
So my book is on Amazon. You can also order it from bookstores, but it's called Braving Therapy, Rape, Buried Trauma, and the Triumphant Journey Over PTSD. And it's written under L. Knipe. I have a website and I'm on Facebook under L. Knipe. But there's not a lot more there. It's mostly what you would get on Amazon if you look up Braving Therapy.
That's wonderful. And what I'm going to do is put all this information in the show notes so there's no excuse for people not to be able to come back and get the information, find your book, follow you, and learn to speak up, because that is what is going to help all of us in the future.
Right. Don't let that shame get you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. We certainly appreciate you. Have a great day.
Thanks, Karen. Bye-bye.